Chapter 81, No Affinity. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 81. No Affinity. When they arrived at the temple, Aaliyah quickly went to the receptionist and handed over her card to the receptionist. I want to go to the skill room. I understand. Let me guide you. The receptionist gave a signal to her company worker to replace her before leading both Aaliyah and Theo to the second floor. This was the first time Theo entered the second floor, but other than the huge lobby and bustling people, nothing changed. He still couldn't understand the layout of this floor at all. Suddenly, the receptionist turned left and placed her thumb on the door's lock, scanning both her thumb and retina to open the door. She then let them inside, where only a few people were searching for skills inside. Aaliyah didn't mind them and quickly went to another counter to see the skill catalog. This is Mr. Mayman. According to your current privilege, you can only get 2 skills this year. 2. This year. Theo widened her eyes and looked at her with a weird expression. Aaliyah only waved her hand as if it wasn't a big deal. It's fine. I can buy more skills if I want later. Also, we are going to increase your overall strength, so take a look at the catalog to see if you have something in your mind. Theo couldn't comprehend why Aaliyah would waste one of the 2 chances she got in a year, but remembered the fact that she came from a wealthy family. She could buy another one directly on the Skylink network no matter how expensive it was. Still, he doubted that would happen unless something extreme happened, since Aaliyah didn't rely on her family that much. After receiving the catalog, they began searching for their respective skills. Aaliyah ended up getting an E-rank skill that allowed her to send a shock wave through the ground and hit the enemy. Theo also picked one skill. Considering all his skills were offensive type skills other than the haste, he chose a defensive skill to fix his balance. Skill. Elemental Shield, E, effect. Creates a magical barrier on the caster, blocking both physical and magical damage. The magical barrier disappears once its durability reaches 0. The magical barrier will be significantly weaker if used within 10 minutes of the previous usage. Aaliyah then took out her Skylink and paid for both cards before handing him his card. When Theo received the card, he couldn't help but peek at its true form, but to no avail. He had been trying to replicate the eye that the God of Mischief gave him, and he still had a hard time successfully using it. Fortunately for him, he managed to get it right after 3 tries, albeit it only appeared for an instant. Skill. Elemental Shield, E. Upgradable upgrade. Fuse 3 rank E skills and 10 rank F skills. In an instant, he realized that this skill's potential was higher than he thought. In fact, it had the same potential as his blink. Even though he just used it for a split second, excruciating pain roasted his brain to the point he couldn't help but let out a single groan despite trying to endure it. He dropped to the ground while clutching his head. KH. Oi, Theo. What's happening to you? Aaliyah's face turned pale, misunderstanding the whole situation. In her mind, Theo seemed to be suffering because of some sort of injury back when that earthquake occurred 2 weeks ago, making her feel more guilty. After all, she saw Theo suffer when he was alone from time to time, unaware of the fact that he could see how to upgrade a skill. The others also panicked because they didn't know the whole story, trying to call the ambulance, but the pain subsided and Theo said, "I'm fine. There's nothing wrong." Theo took a few deep breaths before rising from the ground, showing a smile to make others not worry. "I'm fine. No need to go to the hospital. I know what's going on with my body." Aaliyah grabbed his arm and looked at his eyes with a worried expression, but Theo didn't give a slight signal that his words were a lie. "Don't worry. It's not because of you." Theo shook his head with a calm expression. "If you don't believe me, how about I give you the money for the skill?" Aaliyah hesitated, not because she thought about the money but because she doubted Theo was alright. Ultimately, she shook her head and said, "No need. Let's go back." Theo nodded and exited the building. After discussing a bit with Aaliyah, they decided to visit her grandfather's shop. Surprisingly, the moment they entered the shop, Nart Eilrik, her grandfather, instantly recognized her weird appearance and facepalmed. "I'm sorry, who are you? I don't remember raising my grandfather." Aaliyah pouted and glanced at Theo. Seeing his figure again, Nart wasn't as shocked as before, even though it was still astonishing that Aaliyah would bring this man to him. However, Nart had no intention of ruining this, so he teased them again. "Yo, boy. You are great. This is the first time my daughter can listen to anyone other than her family." "Grandfather." She slammed the table and glared at him. Fine. I got the message yesterday. You are here to get a specialized weapon for him, right? Well, I remember him getting a blue spear in this shop, so what do you think about that spear?" Theo thought for a moment and explained, "I don't have a problem. I feel I have gotten used to it already." "Is that so? I will create a similar spear while imbuing a magic stone as its eye. Do you have an element that you like? I mean, what is your affinity?" "Affinity?" Theo tilted his head in confusion. Nart widened his eyes and glanced at his granddaughter. "He is a first year and has no advanced education." She shrugged. "Even I don't know about his affinity." He scratched the back of his head, opened his drawers and took out 9 palm-sized crystals. "Go inside there." Aaliyah opened the door next to the counter and led Theo inside. It turned out that this room was like that of a change room where the owner could take measurements and such for his customers. He then presented all 9 crystals to Theo, each in a different color. They were red, light blue, dark blue, brown, light green, dark green, yellow, pink, and white. "Can you control your magic power?" "Yes." Theo nodded with a serious expression. "Try pouring it on these stones one by one." Theo nodded and poured his magic power in succession, but nothing gave any sort of reaction. "I've finished." "No reaction, huh?" Nart narrowed his eyes. Even Aaliyah couldn't help but frown. "Did I do something wrong?" Nart shook his head and explained. "Each person has a natural affinity to one of the elements in nature. Fire, ice, water, earth, wind, plant, lightning, space, and time. Like Aaliyah beside you, she has an affinity with fire, allowing her to wield the fire easier than anyone else. Of course, it doesn't mean that you can't use a fire-based skill. You can. You just need a bit more effort to control it. I'm sure you know what I mean, right?" Theo closed his eyes and nodded. "Does it mean I have no potential?" "Not necessarily so. As I said earlier, each person has a natural affinity and your affinity is not toward the element but to the magic power itself. This means that if you wield a skill without an element, you will feel more compatible than any other skill. It comes with advantages and disadvantages. For example, you can't burn someone with your affinity unless you have the skill to burn them or something like that. However, you can wield magic power better than anyone else. That's what it means to have no element affinity. I know that having an element like fire or lightning makes you cool, but I have a friend with no affinity as you. He is the one I respect the most. As for his strength, well, he can destroy this entire castle with just a single punch by controlling his magic power. I'm sure that you can imagine how powerful he is." Nart couldn't help but smile when looking at Theo. Theo widened his eyes and opened his mouth in surprise. Artbeat's castle could still be considered large, spanning over 2 miles in radius. Yet, the person in his mouth could actually destroy it with a single fist. Theo felt like this person was even stronger than his master. "That's why I don't think you need a specialized weapon. Looking at your build, I think you need a pair of boots, gloves, and arm guards to avoid hindering your movement." "Alright. I will just make those 3 for you since I can't fulfill my granddaughter's request." "Well, you better be nice to my granddaughter, okay? I will be holding a grudge if you are not, grandfather." There's nothing between us. Aaliyah shouted, wanting to beat her grandfather that continuously teased her. You don't. Nart made a shocked expression. Considering that Aaliyah would bring someone to him as well as giving so many things, he thought that there was something between them. But her expression looked too serious to even lie. Nonetheless, Nart didn't stop teasing her just to see her cute reaction, pouting. Humph. It's the first time seeing you bring someone like this. But it seems I can't be a great grandfather in this life. Either way, since I've misunderstood your relationship, I will shamelessly misunderstand it all the way. It's not that easy to see my Aaliyah become this good to other people after all. Hold up. Stop that grandpa joke. Chapter 82, Get Lost. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 82. Get lost. After getting the armed guards, he finally left the place. Aaliyah kept apologizing to him about her grandfather's teasing even though Theo didn't mind it anymore. In fact, if they didn't have anything between them, why should they overreact to a simple joke made by an elderly man? That was why both of them handled the joke pretty calmly. Although Aaliyah wanted to stay with him for a bit more to know what kind of environment and personality Theo had in order to read him better, Theo decided to return to his home, saying he would like to rest. BDNV. Since she didn't want to be that pushy either, she let him go and returned to prepare for tomorrow. The next day, Theo quickly did everything needed before going to school. Surprisingly, he found his spear and sword in his room, delivered by his master, albeit he never saw or felt her coming. When he checked the two weapons, he found a piece of paper. Focus on your awareness and technique for the first month. No need to go out to get to another level unless your team asks you to go with them. Theo fell silent and pondered the reason his master gave this kind of instruction. His breathing had been pretty good and became the first one he mastered, and his control had improved as he could even aim at 10 different targets at the same time. Although it wouldn't be as accurate, the level of control he grasped was still apparent. However, it was different for his techniques. He managed to remember all the steps in his footwork, but he needed so much practice before it could be instilled into his instinct. There was also a spear technique which he would probably rehearse in this room. But his awareness was more important because it was his worst aspect and he needed to work a bit harder to completely understand it. As soon as they returned to the gym, they found their instructor, Radvils, waiting for them. He seemed to be holding his Skylink, checking some files that he deemed useful. After another 5 minutes, he raised his head and looked at them. You all have finally arrived. 5 minutes before the schedule. That's good enough. Rising from his chair, he then tapped something on his Skylink as the gym's light turned off while another blue screen appeared right behind Radvils. I'm going to explain the rules for this second stage of training. You have 2 months, specifically 8 weeks, including this one, for this session. Every Monday to Friday, you are to study like usual. We can't afford to have you slacked in your exam after all. School and Grand Gaia have the same importance to me, so don't make trouble. I will be listening to your teachers. Those who are causing trouble will be expelled from the competition. On Saturday, you can have a group meeting all you want, and how you spend it is up to you and your group. On Sunday, you have the chance to fight against another group. The one who wins will get someone from the opponent's team. Once you only have yourself in your group, your chance has gone to smoke. In other words, the first round of battles will surely eliminate half of the people here. Anyway, I don't care about trash who lose in the first battle, so let's move on to the winner. After getting the 3rd member, you will continue with this schedule until you get the 6 members. If you don't want to participate to rest your body, you can tell me to stop your matchmaking every Sunday. And yes, the decision is yours. I only have one thing I want from you. Whatever you think about your teammate, prioritize yourself over them. Win. Even if you need to do it by yourself. I don't care what happens to the losers anyway. Alright, I will now allow a few questions. Radvils finally stopped and looked at them with a serious expression. Surprisingly, the first person who raised her hand was none other than Aaliyah. I just want to confirm 3 things. First, you said we have the right to choose for ourselves. Is it including the matches? Something like a challenge match. Second, since the Grand Gaia requires 2 participants from each grade, there is a possibility of us having no one to choose, especially when we have 5 members. Lastly, do we have an option to not pick anyone in a particular fight? Thinking about it for a while, Radvils nodded his head. For the first question, no, you won't get a challenge match. Everything will be random, and I don't want to hear you say, I lost because my opponent was too strong. It was bad luck. Once you say it, get lost. The Grand Gaia won't let you pick your opponent as well, so it's a preparation for the real deal. For the second and third questions, I can assure you will get at least 1 member from each fight. Also, you have to choose someone in every fight. Don't want to choose. Just lose. You won't choose anyone at that moment. He shrugged. Aaliyah closed her eyes for a few seconds before lowering her hand. Thank you. Any more questions? The second person was a small guy. Yes, it was none other than Cyril Hilbert. He asked, suppose we lost, would we have the chance to exact our revenge? That's an interesting question. As long as the number of the team is the same, you will have the chance to get a revenge match. Of course, once you're defeated, your opponent won't stop going forward, so you have no chance to fight them again, just like in real life. And congratulations, you've become a loser. That's an interesting answer, thank you. Suddenly, another person raised his hand and asked, it's just my opinion, but I can't accept your statement. What do you mean by prioritizing yourself? We are here to make a group of 6. For most of us, our team is our main priority, particularly those of us who'll participate on the international stage. There's no way I can accept that statement. Radvils widened his eyes as if he was taken aback. He closed his eyes and thought for a moment to see if he could give an answer with proper language. Unfortunately for him and everyone else, Radvils simply had no other words in his mind other than his usual style. Even the principal had been obliterated by his own speech, and he was too lazy to even change it, especially for a kid before him. His expression was calm, but his tone was annoyed. He opened his mouth, and the words that came out of his mouth stunned everyone. Get lost, then. Chapter 83, Play Friends. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 83. Play Friends, Get Lost, then. He let out a long sigh while scratching the back of his head. Do you realize that your question is too cringe? Are you implying that the power of friendship or love will overcome anything in this cruel world? No. It's your power. Take those words back. The guy gritted his teeth and remembered how he got saved by his teammate during the training. You don't know anything about people. Our friends will help us when the time is needed. Some even sacrifice their lives. Radvils chuckled and replied. I don't mean to be rude against the deceased, but who? Those dying people can participate in Grand Gaia. How about you resurrect one of them here? I wait. No matter how weak you are compared to your friend or rival, you will automatically become stronger once your rival is dead. Friends help us. Don't make me laugh. Everything is give and take. If you want to play friends, how about you quit this school? The guy shook his head. You're wrong. If you truly believed it, why did you choose our school instead of going to create a perfect team with the ace from each school? That's where you're wrong. They can become an ace because of their background. That's all. The true ace is someone who has experienced up and down in their lives and comes out victorious. Your starting point is simply different. Only when you reach a far higher level will you find these aces. And now, I'm giving you the chance to become one of these aces. If you desire to be one, then come back on Sunday. And 2 more additional rules since you like your teammates too much. The first rule will be the one choosing your next teammate will be the last person to join your team. In other words, if Person A asks Person B to become his teammate, Person B has the right to choose the next member, which is Person C. After that, Person C will get the right. This will continue until you get all the members. You like your teammate and can't abandon them, right? I will let you trust them with everything. I'm a good person, you know. On the surface, Radvils truly considered the person's belief and took it seriously, but for those who were more skeptical about this, they could only think the opposite. Radvils arranged this rule out of spite. If the last person they chose didn't have the desire to win or continue, they would simply choose trash in the next round. The cycle would continue before their choice ended up ruining the entire team. At the same time, this would also show that person's judgment level. Seeing some had realized the real meaning of his rule, Radvils continued, I almost forgot to tell you something. No one is allowed to say something or contact the one who has the right. We will monitor your gesture through the camera. Those who are found out will be disqualified along with their teammates. Thump. That statement just reinforced the fear in their hearts since they wouldn't be able to make a good group once they chose the wrong person. Additional rule number 2. Since information will be spread everywhere, the matchmaking will be revealed half an hour before your match and the record of their fight. But, of course, there is nothing that can be shown in the first round. You can use those 30 minutes to research your opponents as well as your battle plan. After all, only fools are coming to the battlefield without any preparation at all. And with the current technology, you will surely get 1 or 2 pieces of information on the internet. Then, I will excuse myself. After giving that long explanation, he finally stepped down and walked off the stage. Surprisingly, the principal had been waiting for him, crossing his arms. You are contradicting yourself. You say that you don't want anyone to say they have bad luck, but all your actions and training are based on luck. Whether it's the people chosen in their respective group or their matchup. Everything relies on luck. Radvils made a big smirk as he halted his steps, saying, as expected of Mr. Principal, you are quite observant. I just don't want to see them relying on it. In Grand Gaia, we don't have the right to choose our opponent, so luck will be playing its might there. No matter what kind of method I need to use, I will bring a team that is capable of fighting against international students. That's all. Without waiting for his response, Radvils left since he didn't want to get bothered anymore. Because their schedule seemed to be only listening to Radvils today, many students decided to call it quits and had a fun time since last month's training was too harsh. Aaliyah tried to look around to find Theo, thinking, I should ask him tomorrow to talk about our plan for this training and finalize our current setup. But, unfortunately for her, she couldn't find Theo at all. At first, she thought about coming over to say her thoughts, only to abandon the idea right away since Theo didn't like exposure. Then, she tried to send a message to Theo, but other than giving his skills, she never got his number, so it was impossible to talk to him. She face-bombed and felt helpless. It turned out she forgot to do something that important. Because of the constant living in the other world where they couldn't even contact each other with Skylink, it somehow directed the importance of contact information to another thing. Dejected, Aaliyah looked down before looking at her right, finding her best friend coming to her. Aaliyah. How are you doing? Who is your partner? You don't bully him or her, right? I don't bully him. So, it's a boy. What is his name? What grade? As expected, you must have chosen a third year. No. He is not a third year. Ho. A junior, huh? I won't say anything about him. Besides, you are usually pretty chill, why have you become like this today? I'm just curious because I have heard from Uncle that your current teammate is among the best crop. He didn't tell me anything though. Anyway, we will be rivals from now on. Don't expect me to tell you everything. She looked away. Right. You just want to groom the boy as your Aaliyah covered her mouth with her hand and glared at her. Don't say it. I see. To have Aaliyah give this kind of reaction. He is interesting. She smiled and waved her hand. I'm going to meet up with my teammate then. See you later. Chapter 84, Reason for Bullying. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 84. Reason for Bullying. After getting the instruction from his master, Theo decided to hole up in his apartment, trying to practice his spear technique and awareness. Of course, the room was small, so he pushed all unnecessary things from the center and imagined holding a spear since it would just hit the wall. He didn't even care about Aaliyah since there was no agreement beforehand, forgetting the fact they didn't even have each other's contact numbers. Still, it was a fulfilling rest since he didn't need to be in constant fear like on the other side. When Sunday arrived, Theo prepared everything, including his spear. Yet, he felt as if his feet were chained down to the ground when he was about to leave. His eyes were fixated on his mask. Theo decided to take 1 minute to consider it. First of all, the benefit of using a mask was to prevent anyone from knowing his identity, but he would stand out either way since Aaliyah's presence was the biggest one in school. At the same time, Aaliyah would probably realize he was the Joker just by putting on a mask when no one did it. Hence, he didn't plan to bring it with him. After considering a few more pros and cons, he decided to bring it as a backup plan, hiding it in his bag since everything could happen. Either way, he didn't care anymore if Aaliyah knew about his other identity. The trip to the school took only a few minutes. Surprisingly, Aaliyah seemed to wait for him by the school gate and ended up creating traffic since many boys and girls wished to know her teammate. When their eyes intertwined, Theo realized he didn't think it through and raised his vision before returning to normal. It was a signal for her and only Aaliyah would understand this. Theo didn't wait for her and went to the main building's roof first since they needed to talk somewhere private. Unbeknownst to both of them, there was another pair that had been waiting for her mysterious teammate. They were none other than Sihan and Ellen pair. Knowing her best friends for almost a decade, Ellen already learned about her eyes. Her body swayed left and right as if the wind blew her, but it just showed a bit of her excitement. What are you doing? Sihan tilted his head in confusion. Ellen's eyes were half open like her usual appearance. With a small smile on her face, Ellen answered half-heartedly, I have finally found Aaliyah's teammate. It's surprising to be honest. Who? Sihan felt a bit curious about the strongest student's partner in this competition since they might fight against each other sooner or later. He tried to look at Aaliyah's face again but found nothing out of the ordinary. Do you remember the guy you protected a month ago? It was a fight in the gym. Sihan widened his eyes and opened his mouth in surprise. Of course, he remembered this person. Now that I think about it. I was curious about that guy after defeating Lost, so I searched his information for a day and found out that you bullied him. Well, I'd confirm the rumor was true too. Ellen squinted her eyes with a serious expression in that lazy expression of her. What was your reason? Sihan closed his eyes and calmed down before shaking his head. It's nothing. Then how about I guess it? She smirked and continued, you don't want this type of person to get hurt, so you bully him to protect him. At the same time, you also give him a choice whether to get stronger and fight back or quit school so he doesn't throw his life away. Which one? A sad, nostalgic stare started to show in Sihan's eyes. It was apparent that Sihan indeed bullied him for a complicated reason, not just like a regular bully. Still, he decided to shake his head, refusing to answer. Ellen managed to catch a glimpse of a small smile that appeared for a split second on his face, knowing that he was just playing the role of a bad guy. As for the reason, she didn't want to ruin it by asking another question. Instead, she said, well, I hope we can meet them in a fight. I really want to see someone who piques Aaliyah's interest. Aren't you a bit too mean? That means we are going to separate them. Ho, you seem to be confident we will win in a fight. Ellen smirked and shrugged. Anyway, let's hope that we will find a good team in this competition. Agree. Meanwhile, Theo had been standing on the rooftop, waiting for Aaliyah to come. Only after 10 minutes, she finally opened the door to the rooftop to meet him. Sorry. I have taken too much time to deal with the others. Aaliyah apologized while smiling. Before we talk about anything, can I ask for your number first? I was in a bind 2 days ago, you know. Theo thought for a moment and nodded. Sure. I don't mind. The two took out their Skylink and shared their contact information. Theo then wasted no time and asked, what are we going to do? You must have worried about your identity. Don't worry. I will take care of it. She pointed her finger to her Skylink. We can contact each other now, so it's not that big of a deal to go alone. We can also head to the room separately. Anyway, do you know anything about the simulation room? Not really. I see. Because the duel is usually open for 2 people to fight each other, they have 1 table, 1 screen, and a pair of simulation capsules to prepare for everything. And each room is separated by a thin layer that can be opened with a slight force, so yeah, I think that's how it is. Theo looked down while crossing his arms. I see. Thank you and sorry for doing all this. I will accept your apology as long as we win. I will also accept your thanks if we can continue without losing a single time. She smirked. That's the problem. After pondering this matter for 2 days, he decided to reveal the restriction his master put on him. In a battle, I'm not allowed to use my clone and magic bullet because I have been too reliant on them. The condition to break free from this condition is to lose once. As one would expect, she was stunned. With those 2, winning would probably be easy. As much as I want to say something bad about it, I know that I have no right since I can't even use my left hand. Theo narrowed his eyes and sighed. Well, we can only try. Just so you know, I have no plan in losing. Alright. I'm a bit fired up. I'm going then. Call me if you need anything. Chapter 85, Virtual World. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 85. Virtual World. After that meeting, Theo quickly headed to the last of the 3 buildings in this school. Surprisingly, the lobby looked similar to that of Fighter Temple. It had a huge lobby with only a single counter that managed the entire fighting system. On top of the counter hung a huge screen where he found a few codes like F21 and F549. He then remembered the number he got from Major Sam. If he looked at the pattern, his code would be D55. So many people were waiting for their turns, making Theo feel a bit nauseous. He walked to a little less crowded area and found 3 corridors with A, B, and C on them. When he took another look at the screen, he would find another code that seemed to be telling them about their room. Since they were waiting for an unknown period of time, Theo decided to go to the corner while practicing his awareness. It shouldn't be that visible for others since he didn't openly show it. Surprisingly, their turn came 1 match before lunch. He furrowed his eyebrows when he looked at the match. Up. D1 and D55 in A.023 versus J2 and J109 in C.017. Theo narrowed his eyes. Without anyone telling him, the moment he saw Aaliyah's code, he realized that number was based on their ranking on the first day of their training camp. In other words, he would be fighting against the number 2 in J group together with someone who almost reached the top 100 people. Although he expected that someone powerful as J2 would choose a better guy, Theo instantly knew J109 was also a first-year student like him. Since their combination was most likely the same, he became a bit fired up, thinking he would be fighting against someone in the same year while Aaliyah took care of the other. He let Aaliyah go first before following her to Corridor A a few minutes later, considering they had 30 minutes of preparation and there was nothing to be reviewed in the first battle. Inside, he found so many doors inside the 6 feet wide corridor. According to the distance between the door alone, he could roughly judge the room's space. Though, he ignored it for the time being and headed straight to his room. .023. After confirming the tag on the door, Theo opened the door, entered the small room, and quickly closed the door. The room was 20 feet wide and 60 feet long. On his right was a wall stretching from the door to the end of the room with a screen in the middle. On his left was a 2 feet tall cylinder known as a training capsule. There was one in the opposite direction, only separated by a table. Behind the table was a long couch connecting from one training capsule to the other. If there were no training capsule, he would think of this room as a karaoke room, to be honest. Aaliyah had been waiting for him while typing a few things on the table. Out of curiosity, he saw her profile on the table's screen, showing the allocation of her points. Come sit. Aaliyah gently tapped the spot next to her as if telling him to sit there. I just finished allocating my points. It's your turn. Theo nodded his head and sat on the spot she pointed at earlier while Aaliyah typing a few things before the screen showed Theo's picture with a blank status point. The point is a normal level 50 person. I've allocated mine at a similar ratio as my current status points. What will you do with yours? Theo contemplated for a moment and started allocating his points. Because there was no need to fight for a long time, he allocated slightly less on his magic power and turned them into strength. This will be my status. That's good enough. Aaliyah nodded with a smile before swiping from left to right, changing the screen. Theo furrowed his eyebrows when he saw two pictures along with their names. One of them turned out to be one of his bullies, the one that had gotten physical with him other than Lost and Sihan. Hantar Dagger. Scott Brown. This guy, Hantar, is among the top 10 in this school. His and my fighting styles are pretty similar. I will take care of him since the other one is a first-year like you. Do you have something to add? Theo contemplated and asked, is there any rule in this battle? Aaliyah nodded and swiped the screen again, showing 3 rules. There are only 3 rules. First, no physical contact before the match starts. Both teams only need to say, start, for the countdown to start. Second, the information you put here is guaranteed by the temples, so your information will be safe. Feel free to enter all of your skills. Of course, you will be disqualified if we realize you don't have the skill yourself. Last but not least, wreck your opponent. I have no doubt that the instructor was the one writing the last rule. Theo's eyebrows twitched. Agreed. Aaliyah facepalmed and shook her head helplessly. Anyway, as you said earlier, you take care of this Hantar while I handle the other one. He paused for a moment. Still, please don't say or react to anything that will happen before the match, alright? Although she didn't know why Theo requested it, she still nodded. Okay. After inputting all skills except Blink, Theo then rose from the couch and looked at the capsule. Since this was Theo's first time, Aaliyah walked with him and showed him what to do. You do it like this. The capsule's door was opened with a single push of a button. Just enter with your spear. It will scan the weapon information and recreate it in the virtual world. Theo nodded and entered the capsule. The inside had some rubber that seemed to be going to withstand his body weight when he entered the virtual world. To activate the capsule, you need to say, activate, understand? Yep. Theo then tried to lean back while matching his posture with the one shown on it. The rubber then came out and locked him up gently to prevent him from falling to the floor. I'm going to finish everything else. You can experience the virtual world first. Aaliyah waved her hand and closed the capsule's door. Theo closed his eyes and said without hesitation, activate. Suddenly, he felt something changed and opened his eyes, finding himself inside a 100 by 100 feet room. The sidewalls and ceiling were completely white, while the floor was filled with short green grasses. He tried moving his body while raising his hand, looking at his spear. There's no abnormality. It's like moving my own body. Theo was satisfied since there wouldn't be a problem in this state. Not long after, Aaliyah appeared behind him and surprised him with a question. What do you think? Theo's body shook, and he turned around, replying to her. Yes, I don't have a problem. Good. Now we need to wait for our opponents. Theo agreed and waited for a whole 3 minutes before two young men appeared out of thin air. The first guy was a collected black-haired young man. He wielded a sword in his hand. However, the other one was a blonde-haired male with a slightly bigger body than the other. He laughed out loud when he found Theo becoming his opponent. To think we will meet again, Theodore Griffith. I need to thank God for granting me this opportunity. I can't wait to ruin your chance to go to another stage since you are going to lose. No need to thank. Before he finished his words, he suddenly felt a breeze around his cheek. He widened his eyes and found that Theo already raised his hand with his spear planted on the ground behind him. What did you do? Were you going to attack me earlier? Theo chuckled as he looked down on Scott. He made a mocking smile and said sarcastically, "Oops. I think your voice is more powerful than your fighting skill. My spear missed too far from your face because of your speech. I'm impressed." Chapter 86, A Plan. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 86. A Plan. You bastard. Scott clenched his fists and stepped forward, raising his voice. However, Theo ignored everything he said and walked toward his spear, passing them as if nothing happened. When Scott was about to blow up after Theo passed him, Huntar grabbed his arm, preventing him from moving while glaring at Scott. In an instant, there was fear in Scott's eyes as he shut his mouth and cursed Theo in his mind. This action became another point of observation for Theo, considering he had the chance to pick up the next member. While Theo grabbed his spear, Aaliyah furrowed her eyebrows, never expecting Theo to have this kind of side. When he was with her, Theo was passive-aggressive since she allowed it. But this time, Theo was full of anger, trying to piss this Scott off. A promise is a promise. It seems he has a lot of frustration since he has been in this situation for a long time. Aaliyah sighed inwardly as she sensed Hunter's gaze aiming at her. He must be thinking about the reason Aaliyah would pick a first-year, this kind of first-year. Either way, he didn't have the intention to back down in this matter. He whispered to Scott, "You handle that Theodore Griffith first. As long as we can get Aaliyah, we will have a high possibility of winning." Scott stayed silent, but his murderous gaze alone already told him the answer. On the contrary, Aaliyah couldn't help but shake her head in disappointment. She never thought that someone among the top would choose this type of guy as his partner. He seemed to be strong, so she could also understand the circumstances since it was also the reason why she recruited Theo. Still, she would rather choose a second or third place with good character instead of an easy one like this. But there was also another question in her head after working together with Theo for a month. She remembered Theo was a bit more submissive, letting the others talk down on him to make them underestimate his power. It was at that time he turned the situation around, exchanging his role with the hunter. Hence, she never expected Theo to create this kind of chaotic situation. After grabbing his spear, Theo returned to his position and made a mocking smile, saying, "Hee hee. What did you say again? How about going into politics? I'm sure your words are effective in destroying your opponents. Oh wait, you're a muscle brain since you can only try to hit the person after you lose in an argument." Scott wanted to hit this guy's face as soon as possible. If Huntar didn't hold him back, he would have charged at him from the start. Theo snorted and returned to Aaliyah while waving his hand. "You can't touch me here, right? It's funny to see that Aaliyah Eilrich will partner up with a scumbag." Huntar couldn't let it slide and returned Theo's mockeries right back at his face. However, Theo only shrugged and looked at Scott while saying, "It's better than a gorilla." "You bastard. Theo." Aaliyah decided to step in because she worried about his reputation. Theo shrugged and said with a smile. It feels good to get back at your bullies after experiencing it for so long. I couldn't help it. Aaliyah widened her eyes, not because of the bullies, but it was due to Theo speaking his mind out loud. This had never happened to her, so she quickly realized Theo must be planning for something big. She assumed Theo would be showing his prowess in this battle, making the second opponents wary. Still, Aaliyah needed to say one thing. You don't have protection after this, you know. Your life is going to be much worse after this. I am planning to win by relying on you. What's wrong with that? Theo shrugged, acting like a scumbag while putting his hand on her shoulder with one finger lifted. Aaliyah frowned as if she got a signal from Theo. Although she didn't understand the whole meaning behind his words, she could safely assume that she needed to work harder to dominate the opponents in this round since that one finger meant she needed to fight alone. She let out a long sigh and said, "This is only because of our agreement." Hantar opened his mouth in surprise when he heard those words, thinking, agreement. Is he blackmailing her? You. Hantar paused to contemplate his actions before saying, let's start the match. After having her shoulders tapped twice, Aaliyah nodded and said, let's start. Just like the instruction, a huge number appeared in the middle of the field. Theo sighed and raised his hand, I'm going to watch the battle from there. When Theo showed a nonchalant attitude, it became even more apparent that they would only face Aaliyah in this round. However, right before it hit, Theo turned around and charged forward with his spear. Theo quickly closed their distance, arriving in front of Scott, who just lowered his guard after seeing Theo's back. But Theo just took advantage of the rule again, like how he did when angering Scott. The rule stated they could have physical contact after the countdown was 0, so it didn't count if they just positioned themselves. Even if Theo placed himself right before Scott with his spear on his throat, waiting for the countdown to reach 0. Scott quickly threw himself to the back to avoid this sudden movement from Theo, who almost pierced his throat. You bastard! Scott gritted his teeth and raised his blue-colored sword. The sword itself was 6 inches wide, making it a pretty big sword that emphasized power instead of speed. Before Scott could recover, he charged forward. Hantar raised his sword, which seemed similar to what Aaliyah used other than the color, to prevent Theo from advancing, only to find Aaliyah swinging her sword to stop him. KH. Your opponent is me. Aaliyah smiled as they engaged in a fight. Meanwhile, Theo kept charging at Scott and tried his best to suppress him. Pierce. Still, as expected from a person chosen by the number 2 in a group, there was no way he was that bad of a fighter. When he was about to get stabbed, he blocked Theo's skill with the huge body of his blade and laughed. Is that all? Ha ha ha. No matter how many tricks you use, you won't defeat me. Just accept your fate. You won't go so far in your life. Theo gnashed his teeth, looking very irritated. He stomped the ground and planned to do a second strike, but he suddenly felt excruciating pain on his right waist before finding Scott's foot at that spot. That kick launched him several feet away from them as Theo landed on his belly. Chapter 87, Deserve Better. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 87. Deserve better, ha ha ha. Scott laughed when he realized Theo was weak. This is our power difference. Even if our levels are the same, you won't be able to defeat me. Theo gritted his teeth and quickly stood up. He pointed his spear toward Scott and made eye contact with Aaliyah, who seemed to struggle to help him because of Hantar. As he was about to leap toward Scott, he stomped the ground as if making his location known. To everyone's surprise, Theo's shout echoed in the field. Aaliyah! On your right! He is coming for you! Both Scott and Hantar were bewildered as the latter quickly glanced to the left to confirm it, only to find he got fooled by Theo. As for Aaliyah, she simply watched Hantar's facial features to know the answer. The moment she saw him lowering his guard, she matched Theo's lie and broke free from Hauntar, making her way toward Theo. Don't lie. Scott became angrier and planned to kill Theo in this strike to stop Hauntar from getting distracted. And before Scott hit Theo, Aaliyah appeared between them, stopping Scott's sword, giving Theo a chance to thrust his spear, stabbing Scott. Unfortunately, Scott managed to react and step to the right, making Theo miss his heart and ending up grazing Scott's side. But to show that he didn't pretend to be weak, Theo kicked him on the chest, launching him several feet away like Scott did earlier. He changed the grip of his spear and planned to throw another one before finding Hauntar coming from his side to kill him first before Aaliyah. It was at this time, Theo instinctively stepped behind Aaliyah, exchanging their position and let Aaliyah take the blow. Theo then leaped toward Scott before he could recover and kicked his face, launching him again. Seeing this, Hauntar decided to take one step back and covered his sword with a torrential wind. Aaliyah found his intention and swung to the side, sending a crescent-shaped fire toward Scott. Flaming goo sword. Wind burst. Hauntar, on the contrary, hit the ground as all the wind on his sword burst out. The shock wave flew toward Theo at a faster speed than Aaliyah's, so it hit Theo first. But since he saw Aaliyah's flame lined up with Scott, he decided to take a step forward as a translucent white dot-colored hexagram appeared. The hexagram was twice as big as his body, so it should be able to protect him. Elemental shield. Hauntar widened his eyes in amazement as he saw how Theo's barrier stopped his shock wave. Scott obviously gained enough time to recover and planned to attack Theo from the back, but this was the reason Theo took one step forward. Watch out! He cleared the line between Aaliyah's flaming goo sword and Scott. When Scott was about to hit him, Theo twisted his shield and protected himself from getting hurt by the explosion while watching how the blast killed Scott. Unfortunately for him, it also meant Theo would be hit by the full force of the shock wave, crushing him and ultimately blowing him away to the wall. Bang! His body was stuck on the wall as his body got covered with blood. Hauntar was surprised to see Theo acted like a man to block that attack with his body. He thought, did he just use his own body so Aaliyah could kill Scott? However, Aaliyah didn't share the same opinion as she asked inwardly, why did he do that? He should have just used it by taking one step backward and my attack will cause a huge explosion when hitting Hauntar's strike, killing that Scott in the process. Aaliyah couldn't comprehend his intention anymore as if Theo just reset himself to the previous him, who knew nothing about battles. What are you planning, Theo? With this thought occupying her mind, Aaliyah decided to get rid of Hauntar as soon as possible. Aaliyah raised her sword and slashed downwards. As one would expect from a top 10 among the third year, he managed to react to her swing and blocked it with his sword. Aaliyah read his movement and sent a low kick to his right foot. Hauntar reacted to this action as well and raised his foot to block the kick with his knee before pushing back Aaliyah's sword. Suddenly, something entered their awareness as both of them couldn't help but turn their eyes, finding a spear coming toward Hauntar's head. Hauntar gritted his teeth and threw his head backward to avoid this spear. Aaliyah didn't let this chance go and stepped forward, swinging downwards with both hands to get more power. *T. Hauntar cursed as his sword got struck down until it planted itself on the ground as the swing continued, cutting his body diagonally. A blue screen then appeared in front of her eyes, saying, "Congratulations on winning. Your group, Theodore Griffith, has gained the chance to pick the next teammate. Logging out in 3, 2, 1. The system just transferred their consciousness out of the systems right after the battle ended. As soon as they came out of the training capsules, Aaliyah had a serious expression on her face, glaring at Theo as if she didn't agree with this kind of setting. She walked toward him and grabbed his shoulder, asking, "Why? This is the chance for you to get your own revenge, Theo. Why are you pretending to be weak?" Theo widened his eyes in amazement. "Wow, to think you would say it like that. I'm impressed. Anyway, my revenge can be postponed, but winning and getting into the tournament is once in a lifetime. I just want to show you that my head is clear and won't be clouded by revenge. And it's surprising to hear those words from you, considering you have been a good girl until now. I'm a good girl, one that defies logic. But that doesn't mean I don't know good and bad. There is always enough, and that one is enough. Aaliyah shook her head in disappointment and raised her voice. She was just frustrated to have her teammate get looked down on by people. Are you sure you are older than me? I am looking at the bigger picture here, you know. I know. Aaliyah clenched her hands, gripping his shoulders even tighter. Yet, her hands began shaking as she stuttered. I'm just frustrated. You deserve better. Theo smirked and asked, do you know what my master told me about this? Aaliyah frowned and shook her head. It's whether you get the last laugh or not. This is not the last. Theo smiled and looked at the table where he could choose either Hantar and Scott to be their next teammate. He gently put down her hands and tapped on Hantar. And let me show you how I will get the last laugh. Chapter 88, Theo's Reason. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 88. Theo's Reason. And not long after their fight, someone knocked on the door. After opening it, Aaliyah found Hantar in front of their room and asked, would you like to go to a family restaurant or something? We are planning to grab a bite while talking about our next plan. Since there was nothing wrong with this plan, Hantar nodded his head while secretly glancing at Theo, remembering his thought earlier. After he agreed, Theo turned off the machine and told them their fight was over so that the room could be used for another pair. Since the restaurant wasn't that far, they decided to go on foot. Of course, Theo exited last because he didn't want to get more exposure, forcing Aaliyah to drag Hantar first while explaining the situation to him. A few minutes later, they arrived at the restaurant and asked for a private room. It was a 2x2 couch arrangement where Aaliyah ended up sitting next to Theo while Hantar sat on the opposite side of Theo, looking at him with a serious expression. Aaliyah didn't care and picked up the menu while showing it to Theo. Order. Theo only pointed out two things, fried rice and melon juice, without having a change of expression. What about you? Aaliyah asked Hantar with a smile. I will have the same as him. Aaliyah nodded and called the waitress. Meanwhile, Hantar glared at Theo as if he was his enemy before he asked Aaliyah, are you blackmailed? Both Theo and Aaliyah widened their eyes at the same time, exchanging looks and blinking a few times. They just couldn't comprehend how Hantar could arrive at this conclusion. They even acted like normal teammates. Sorry. I heard it wrong, right? Aaliyah tilted her head and asked with a weird expression. If you're talking about blackmail, I don't happen to understand what you're talking about. But you were. Hantar frowned. Ah. Aaliyah remembered the word agreement, and with how Theo acted like a douchebag, he must have had this kind of thought. She couldn't help but chuckle. You're misunderstanding things. Let me explain a few things to you. First of all, he acted completely like someone I've never seen before, so yeah, I couldn't comprehend his way of thinking. Maybe we should have him explain it first. Hantar then glanced at Theo with a serious expression, wondering if this was true. Theo let out a long sigh and asked, what's the purpose of this competition? It's to win, right? And I'm planning to do that. But you should just beat that Scott guy a crap out of him since he was your bully. Aaliyah pouted, still feeling not satisfied with Theo's explanation. I could do that and play weak before turning the situation around, but that's only for one round. There are still a few more fights. Theo shook his head in disappointment. Ah. Aaliyah suddenly fell silent and looked down, contemplating the meaning behind his words. Meanwhile, Hantar, who first met him this way, didn't know what they were doing. What do you mean? Theo thought for a moment and believed it would be fine to tell them. First of all, what do you think about my performance earlier? You've good head but poor skills. Nothing great about you. Theo gave a thumb up. Exactly. Our fight earlier was different from 3 versus 3. Since you were a third year while the other one was a first year, Aaliyah alone should be enough to handle both of you. The moment that thought appeared in my mind, I quickly decided to play it this way. And when our next opponents think of me that way, what will they do? I will. Hantar understood what he meant. They will underestimate you, and it's the best chance to turn the situation around. I think that's not all. Aaliyah shook her head, feeling something was off. Your plan is not only for the next fight, right? Theo smiled and acknowledged her statement. With that kind of acting, when we reach 4 versus 4, the opponent will be wary of him and his scheme. This will become a mind battle soon. And in the last 5 versus 5 fight, he will do another trick which I can't figure out. Hantar was beyond speechless. He only stared at Theo with eyes wide open, but Aaliyah could find a fear behind his eyes. Are you really the same grade as Scott? You're not a big boss of an evil organization, right? What do you mean? Theo rolled his eyes and said, I am just a regular student. Unbeknownst to them, he just wanted to be like his master, trying to see a few steps ahead even if it meant sacrificing a bit of his satisfaction. After all, he could only think this way because he got the restriction from his master. Without revealing his clone and magic bullet, he needed to get through this training, so yeah, he needed to be more creative. Of course, he was grateful to his master for giving him this chance. Anyway, he can obliterate Scott in a few rounds. I think he can also fight you, and even I don't know who will win. Aaliyah smiled. So, don't underestimate him in that aspect as well. I understand. Hantar nodded and looked at Theo, extending his hand. Nice to meet you. I'm Hantar Dagger. I will be your teammate from now on. Theo shook his hand politely and asked, how may I call you? The same as her. Just call me Hantar. No need to be polite in a fight. Sure. Then, I need your contact information so that we can talk about your fighting style, etc. I can make a fighting arrangement against our next opponent after that. You don't mind sharing it with me, no? I won't share my skills with you, but I will teach you how I fight, including what kind of attack I have without mentioning the specific skill names. Do you mind? Nope. As long as I know what to expect, I think we will be fine. Theo waved his hand, telling him it wasn't that big of a deal. He then took out his Skylink and exchanged their contact. Aaliyah, on the contrary, had her mouth wide open, staring at the two with a dumbfounded look. Noticing her gaze, Hantar asked with a weird expression. What? He has never given me something this smoothly. No, he has never treated me this way. What spell did you use? I need to learn it as well to have him treat me a bit better. Seriously. Hantar only looked away, not knowing what to say. Hey. How come? Aaliyah came closer to Theo, demanding this kind of treatment. Theo, how come? Theo only covered her face and pushed her back while saying, shut up. You're annoying. Hantar only looked at them with a smile. If it were not due to Aaliyah's saying Theo was strong, Hantar might have noticed something was wrong with this pair. The only thing that could only be seen by an opponent who had fought him not as a teammate but as an opponent. And this one thing they missed might cause Theo's destruction at one point. Chapter 89, Ridiculous Match. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 89. Ridiculous Match. So, do you have anything you don't like? Theo asked. Like hitting a girl or whatever? No, I think it's fine. As long as you don't ask me to do something too excessive. Hantar shook his head. He didn't care about gender until it became like torture, such as gouging their eyes or burning their skin. I don't mean to be rude, but can I expect you to stop someone from interfering with her or me completely? Theo pointed at Aaliyah. I can't guarantee it, but I will do my best. Then, I guess that's fine. I will ask you a few more things after this since we have school. I will probably ask you more after school. That's fine, right? Yep. I'm free. How about hunting together on the other side? Aaliyah raised a suggestion. We have Saturday as free time and I think it's good enough to understand each other's fighting style, right? Theo thought for a moment, feeling a bit unsure. Why? You don't want to hunt with us? Aaliyah asked. Surprisingly, Hantar was the first to raise his hand. I'm sorry, but I don't think I can go there yet. I need to go to the hospital. Is that so? Aaliyah narrowed her eyes, expecting Theo to reject it but to think Hantar was the one who abstained. She sighed and nodded. Fine, I will trust Theo's strategy for our next fight. Once again. I'm sorry. After getting to know Hantar, Theo quickly disappeared from the area, wanting to settle everything through calls. However, Hantar couldn't help but shake his head when he understood Theo's action. To think such a man was still a first-year student and a bullied one on top of that, he didn't know what would happen if he grew up. Aaliyah couldn't do anything since he was her best finding in Group D. They then went separate ways as Theo simply returned to his small apartment. Like how he wanted to do it, Theo learned that Hantar seemed similar to Aaliyah in fighting style, making him a bit unsure how to play along with both Hantar and Aaliyah. After all, Theo couldn't assist them with his magic bullet, so all three of them were basically the same type. If they didn't have a magician or something, things would start to get annoying. Thus, since he couldn't tell Hantar about getting a magician or something in the next group directly, he dropped clues one after another for the past week. While talking about Hantar's preference in fighting, Aaliyah kept asking about what he planned to do. Unfortunately, he couldn't say anything to her because they didn't know their opponents yet. Saturday came very fast, and Theo had nothing to do other than training. It was at this moment he realized he could just rent a larger apartment since the instructor seemed to avoid having people on the other side for too long like last time. Even if he wasted half a month on the other side, he would be completely fine. But since it was kind of rushed, he decided to take 1 week to consider this, making sure he didn't go for a rash purchase. After all, he needed to consider the third round too, which would last for 3 months. From his point of view, there was no way the students were allowed to camp there for 3 months. Hence, he would surely use the apartment for training and not embarrass his master if she visited him. Thinking about so many things, Theo just stared at his screen with a blank look for an hour, deciding what move he should take next. Aaliyah was in the same condition. Because no one went to the other side, she practiced in her home alone, swinging her blade from morning to night. Meanwhile, the situation wasn't that serene in the principal office. Radvils was sitting on the couch, sipping his coffee with a nonchalant look while Principal Eigen slammed the table and said with a cold tone. Can you explain why the match is like this? What? Radvils raised his vision, staring at the principal with a calm expression. I'm talking about matchmaking. Isn't it supposed to be random? It's random. I don't know what you're talking about. Radvils tilted his head in confusion. I'm asking why the pairing is like this. Do you think I haven't noticed? Radvils furrowed his eyebrows, put his coffee on the table, and crossed his arms. So, what's the problem? I don't see a problem. Just like how you want the ace to participate, now I make them compete. What's wrong with that? I have fulfilled your wish, right? I'm not talking about that. In this scenario, there's no way you can create the best team that this school can offer. So you are aware that your students are not that good. He shrugged. Anyway, my point is. After calculating all the things, I have ranked them from 1 to 10. Those in 1 are the students who are at the top of their grade, while the last is the cannon fodder. That's why I'm ranking all the candidates that I feel will win this training camp in that first group. What? You want me to have the number 1 student to pair up with the worst one? That's not going to work. No matter how I scramble it up, the top will stay at the top. If they don't like the arrangement, they can prove it to me in the third training session. I don't know if you like novels that romanticize the bottom guys with hidden potential, but I have weeded them out during the first training. I have found several of them who have been hiding their abilities since the beginning and made a rational decision. If they're not chosen, it means their chance has gone to smoke for all I care. He shrugged. This is my final decision as the head instructor. Please keep that in mind. The next day, the second round had finally begun and the trio gathered again in the building, waiting for their match. Unfortunately for them, their opponents were far beyond their expectations. F1, F3, and E2 in B. 022 and B.023 versus D1, D55, and J2 in B.036 and B.037. Theo opened his mouth in shock when he saw this composition. What? 3 top people. Theo saw Aaliyah and Hantar coming toward the ward without a care, so he followed not long after, only to find 5 people standing in front of their room. Aaliyah and Hantar were among them, but what he couldn't comprehend was the 3 opponents. When he arrived, he came to a realization that he F***ed up. His plan might not work this time. The 3 were a silver-haired reliable guy, a pink-haired carefree girl, and the only petite guy in the school. Yes, all of them were. Sihan Raskaka, Ellen Marcines, and Cyril Hilbert. Chapter 90, Impression. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 90. Impression. Oh. Who do we have here? Cyril was the first to jump forward, checking Theo from top to bottom. Theo flinched and took a step back, looking at this Cyril with bewilderment. He knew this guy was weird, but he didn't know he was this weird. Aaliyah has chosen you as her first partner. I wonder what is truly the reason. Have you seduced her? He walked in circles while saying all those words. Hey, do you want to join my family? My Hilbert family. While Cyril scanned Theo, Aaliyah turned around, planning to stop her only to have Ellen, her best friend, hug her from behind. So he is a man, huh? Is he a good man? I haven't watched the video since we've gotten into the room yet. I wonder for what reason this princess decided to invite him. Come on, tell me. Don't say it's love, okay? The 2 tried to tease them, but Sihan seemed to be awfully quiet. His eyes kept staring at Theo for whatever reasons before closing his eyes, contemplating a certain thing in his mind. Since they were his opponents, they would surely choose Aaliyah if they lost. And it might be the end for him who was aiming for the Grand Gaia. Hence, there was no choice other than winning. But soon, he remembered what his master told him. I can't use my magic bullet and clone as long as I keep winning. However, if I lose, that restriction is gone. Did Master want me to lose so Aaliyah will leave my team? Did Master wish for me to drop out of this competition? I have heard so many quotes about losing becoming the key to success, but no matter how hard I twist my brain, I can't understand. Should I trust Master here and prepare to lose? Or have I grown too reliant on Aaliyah's power? Theo suddenly came into a realization as his eyes turned cold and walked forward, grabbing Aaliyah's collar from behind and dragging her into the room. Let's not waste our time with the likes of them. Theo. Aaliyah widened her eyes before seeing his eyes looked so cold. She couldn't help but shut her mouth. Theo also asked Hantar with a cold tone. Come in. Ellen was the most shocked one among the 3. This was the first time she found Aaliyah becoming so docile to someone, especially a younger man. However, Theo paid no heed and closed the door without saying anything. Inside the room, he found that the layer that separated the 2 rooms was gone, allowing Hantar to take the 3rd training capsule. What's wrong with you, Theo? Aaliyah asked with a serious expression. Theo shook his head and continued opening the video of their opponent. It was a 2 versus 2 match. He ignored her question and said, I think it's the right time for me to turn around the situation. After the last match, they will think I'm not good, making this match look like 2 versus 3. That's why I'm going to use my power to assassinate someone and ultimately win the match. Well, I agree with your strategy, but who will fight who? Aaliyah asked. That, you will fight Sihan Raskaka while Hantar takes care of Firil Hilbert with me. When the chance arrives, I will go as quickly as possible to Ellen Marcines to kill her since she is a magician. Fine by me. Just one thing to warn you, Ellen is powerful. This is not me giving an opinion about her as her friend, but because I'm her friend, I know her strength very well. And she has been hiding something from me. I feel like she will use it today. Be careful. Theo looked down, falling into deep thought. Meanwhile, after watching the match, Ellen, Sihan, and Firil stared at the screen uncomfortably. Theo was supposed to be Aaliyah's partner, the one she had chosen herself, but it seemed Theo's strength wasn't that great. How did he get together with Aaliyah? Firil asked Ellen, who seemed to know everything about Aaliyah. However, even she could only shrug her shoulders. Hey, I can feel that this guy is evil and cunning, but his ability is not that good. I don't know what's wrong with her. Maybe he blackmails her using something. Won't the Ulrich family take care of it? Or does she have that big sense of justice that forces her to deal with this by herself? Firil complained after watching the match. Aaliyah was angry for this particular reason. She knew Theo's reputation would be a mess since he portrayed himself that way. Sihan even had a look of disappointment when finding this footage. Firil contemplated for a minute before saying, I believe I will be enough to handle this guy with this Hantar. You should worry about Aaliyah instead. Sihan felt Firil's gaze and nodded. Ellen sighed and said, I will help both of you from behind, especially Sihan. If we allow Aaliyah to move freely, it will end up in a disaster. Anyway, let's grab Aaliyah from them. This way, I can ask the reason she follows him. Maybe I can do something for her. Maybe I'm thinking about him seducing our princess. Firil chuckled and pointed at Theo. Look. His face is quite good looking because his complexion is not like a bullied person anymore. And his body is quite buff, so maybe he is good on the bed. I don't know the reason, but I don't think it's that bad. Yeah, seduction is a possibility. I mean, I saw surprises on her face, not fear. In other words, it's not something like blackmail. Ellen started humming while saying, I see. Aaliyah has started climbing the stairs of adulthood. As her best friend, I am overjoyed. Listening to her, Firil couldn't help but make a joke while pointing his finger at himself. How about you two? I can be your partner. As expected from a woman Aaliyah called a chill person, Ellen didn't have a change of expression. Instead, she placed her hand on top of Firil's head and patted him a few times. Good boy, don't talk about things like that easily. Instead of a one-night stand, you should worry about your future. It's not about enjoying your life first before settling down, it's about planning your future first and being a good husband. Grow up, okay? Firil obviously couldn't stand it, knowing he just got owned, and shouted, Why are you lecturing me? You're only 1 year older than me.